Well. Clemson Tiger fans, college football fans, welcome back to another episode of the All In Show right here on the Voice of College Football Clemson channel. Thank you so much for joining me. I am, as always, your host, Tiger Paul Craven. We got a great show for you guys tonight. We're going to talk about a couple articles talking about Clemson being a little overrated coming into 2024, possibly some changes coming with staffers being able to do some on-the-field coaching, and some comments on Dabo Swinney by none other than Paul Finebaum, Clemson fans, ultimate favorite college football commentator, I'm sure. But before we get into all of that and before we get into tonight's show, if you have not subscribed to the channel, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button for us. We are ever so closely to the 5,000 subscriber mark. I think last time I looked, we were about 40 or so away from hitting 5,000. So if you guys could help us out with that, that would be greatly appreciated. This is a live video, so please go ahead and if you're in the chat section right now, while you're in there commenting and getting your thoughts in and communicating with us throughout the show, go ahead and hit that like button while you're in here. That really helps us out. And then last but certainly not least, if you like what me and Jordan do here on the Voice of College Football with the All In Show, go ahead and hit that super chat feature. Does two things. Obviously supports what me and Jordan do here on the show. And then it also guarantees that your question, comment, or whatever you leave attached to that super chat gets read and responded to during the live show. We got 11 people in here right now. Thank you guys so much for being here. If you're watching in the rewatch, always know me and Jordan will post the individual timestamps to the topics that we covered tonight. And without further ado, let me bring on my co-host, Jordan Bowman. Jordan, how we doing tonight, man?
I've been better, honestly. I spent the entire day pretending to work and watching Clemson lose a baseball game. So, this is kind of like the highlight of my day so far. So I'm glad to be here. Honestly, really, this show is the highlight of my day every Thursday, but more so today because that was not fun. I know some of y'all in the chat. I know John was talking about it earlier. That was a brutal way to lose one. So I'm ready to talk some football and get my mind off of that, even though the topics we're about to talk about are not necessarily positive either. But
yeah, absolutely. Tough way to go out for the Clemson baseball team, obviously. Thought we'd get a little bit deeper into the ACC tournament before we got eliminated. But all is well with Clemson baseball. It'll be okay. They get a little bit more rest for that bullpen. They play tomorrow. They go home. They sit there and wait for the NCAA tournament. So nothing really hurt for Clemson baseball. Would have been nice to see them go a little bit further. Tough loss today, like I said, but hey, that's how it be in baseball sometimes, man.
Yeah, it
And
is.
this team has been somewhat of a difficult team to watch down the stretch of this season. Here's to hoping they can kind of get it together. Although the bullpen was really good today, so maybe that's some. If they can continue that, more of that to come. We'll see them go and have a great outing in the NCAA tournament, and that's really what's important.
Yeah, absolutely, man. This is the time of year. It's like, well, I mean, historically, Clemson, it's always been two sports that have been the focus of this school. It's been football and baseball, and so it's like, man, it hurts when you lose, and especially since this fan base has been starved for Omaha for about 14 years now. So it's been a minute, but I think we have the team to do it. But depends on who, whether the bullpen and the pitching wants to show up, because the bats are there for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. The bats are 100% there. Can't wait to see where the chips fall in the NCAA tournament and how Clemson responds to all of that. But obviously, we're going to leave baseball there. We're going to get into the show tonight. Let's give a shout out to the comment section, Jordan, real quick before we dive into the topics that we have planned tonight. We got 14 people in the live chat. Make sure you guys are hitting that like button. Hit that subscribe button if you're not already subscribed. Share the link to this live video, to this live show throughout all your groups. Bring some more people in. They don't have to be Clemson fans. As you guys know, our comment section within our live shows have started to have a lot more fans other than Clemson fans in there, and we enjoy that just as much as we enjoy the Clemson fans. So Jackson Johnson is already in here. He got his comment in first today. Thank you so much for being one of our moderators and always supporting the show. Droid321 is also in here. Thank you for showing up, buddy. John Sarian, always in here as usual, one of our other moderators. Thank you so much. Jay's in here. John Diamato's in here, our resident Michigan fan. He also does a lot of work with the Voice of College Football and the Michigan channel. Go give him some love over there. He always comes over and supports our channel. So return the favor if you guys will. Thank you for showing up, John. Dylan Spell.
And just wanted to point out, the Michigan, they have a live show that they've started this week on Thursdays directly after us. Well, I think maybe an hour or two after us. Let me see. He put it in here. 2 shows in a row. Yeah, I'll have to look, or John can put it in the live chat. But
yeah, John, go ahead and
time to go live. But
if you're in there, go ahead and put the time you're going to go live. John will be live tonight on the Michigan channel. So make sure when we're done here at this show, you guys hop over and go say hi and support him and tell him you came from the Clemson channel. We would greatly appreciate that. Dylan Spell in here. Thank you so much. Let's see. Do we have anybody else in here? Will, our resident Notre Dame fan, is in here. He's in here quite often, pretty much every show. Thank you for showing up. Roger Dodger is in here. USC fan, thank you for showing up. Really appreciate you. I think that is it. Yes, that is it. And John says, all right, so following our show, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, go check out the Michigan channel for their live show that they just started. Tell them that me and Jordan sent you and you came over from the Clemson channel whenever we're done here tonight. But yeah, that does it for the comment section. Thank you guys so much for showing up. Again, every time me and Jordan hop on here, I truly am amazed by how many people that come and hang out with us to hear our thoughts on Clemson football and all of that kind of stuff. It's greatly appreciated. And without further ado, Jordan, let's go ahead and get into the first topic of the night. And we are going to talk about an article that was published on Saturday Blitz, I believe is the website that I found it on. Every now and then, Jordan, I don't know, you probably do this as well. But especially in the off season when there's not a lot going on, you kind of go into Google and you type college football news, Clemson football news, and you just kind of read through articles, visit the various Clemson sites and the college football sites around there. And that's kind of what I've done today to lay out a few topics for us and to talk about some of these national writers and things that are being said about our Clemson Tigers. And Connor from Saturday Blitz published an article this week, his top 5 most overrated teams heading into the 2024 season. And the list is, it has 5, obviously Clemson is on the list. That's why we're talking about it. But Oklahoma's on that list. Texas A&M's on that list. Miami was actually number 1 on the list. Clemson came in at number 2. And then Penn State was also on this list. And Connor kind of laid out his case for why Clemson was amongst the top 5 of most overrated programs coming into the 2024 season. In my opinion, he didn't do a great job of kind of laying out his plan because I believe his first sentence was, it's hard to call Clemson overrated when it's projected to be a top 15, top 20 team. Yes, it is hard to call Clemson overrated if they're projected to be a top 15 team. I think due to the roster talent, you would absolutely, that would be a fair shake of where you would put Clemson preseason, right? I don't think there's a lot there. And the reasons that he kind of laid out for why Clemson is one of the most overrated programs, it's obviously Dabo Swinney. It's his stance on the transfer portal. It's the fact that he didn't bring in a single transfer in this portal cycle. That was really his major complaint, that Dabo Swinney and Clemson as a whole is falling further and further behind each and every season. What were your thoughts, Jordan? I sent you this article earlier and let you know that we were going to talk about it on the show today. What were your thoughts on kind of what Connor laid out in this brief article? And, Clemson coming in at number 2 on Connor's list of SaturdayBlitz.com's most overrated programs in 2024.
Yeah, and I want to preface this by saying, like, I don't like to bash, writers or anything like that. And honestly, this is more of a symptom of kind of what I've noticed. You and I have both noticed. Yeah. About the discourse around Clemson. There just doesn't seem to be much in the sense of, doing any actual research when it comes to Clemson. I feel like when people talk about Clemson, especially this offseason, it's been the same retired, repeated and, just beaten to death talking points, where it gets to the point where it's like, well, okay, well, I can't even, like, do you even know a player on the roster, or do you know anything about what Clemson's bringing back? Do you know what the staff makeup is? Do you know anything other than Clemson didn't take a transfer portal player this cycle? And so it's one of those things where it's you kind of, when the college football media in general is bombarding you with the same talking points over and over and over again, the casual college football fan or observer from a distance who's not, who doesn't follow the program and doesn't, know the ins and outs of the program, they adopt that mindset as well. It's not just, and it's not just fans, it's writers. And so I think kind of reading this article, he said multiple contradictory things about Clemson being good enough and having the talent to contend for an ACC title, but then also saying that they were overrated and that he wasn't sure if they were good enough to compete for a playoff spot. So I'm like, it's one of those things where you've adopted that mindset to the point where you don't even really think about what you're saying when you actually type it. It's just, you say the things that you've heard from other people, and then you insert your own opinions here or there in there, and frame it around that, when with no regard to whether or not you're actually making any sense.
Right.
So it's that's kind of one of the frustrating things about listening to the conversation about Clemson this offseason. And we talked about it a lot last week. It's just everybody's being lazy, and I don't want to say everybody, but a large majority of college football media is they're just regurgitating what they've been fed from others. It's like, oh, Dabo didn't use the transfer portal, and obviously his comments last week have exacerbated that and made it even more of a talking point.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, it's like Clemson didn't take a transfer portal player. I mean, that is what it is. But they still got to play the games. The games still have to be played. Clemson is just as good and capable of winning the games as everybody else. And so it's like, when are we going to stop talking about what Clemson didn't do and what they and talk about what they did do? And that's kind of my biggest frustration when I read that article. And the article itself, was, I mean, it's one of those off-season pieces.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's one of those times. It's this time of year where college football news is slow and people are just finding stuff to generate clicks. But you could have you can put a little bit more effort, and this just goes to college football writers in general.
Yes.
And college football talking, media in general. It's the same lazy takes over and over again, and that's kind of my biggest frustration.
Yeah, and look, you make a lot of good points, Jordan, and we've talked about this, quite often on the show, just the narrative that's out there about Clemson. And the only thing that you ever hear from the national media, and then it gets, to your point, parroted by the more casual fans in college football that don't, necessarily, they're not paying attention to Clemson's roster, right? They're not paying attention in depth to Clemson's recruiting and who they have on the roster, and all of that, in their depth chart and all of that stuff. And, most people don't have time for that. So I'm not faulting anybody for that. But it's when you get the national media types who are paid to research and know the sport, and they have teams that do this. I just feel like constantly, when anytime Clemson is brought up, it's only talking about the portal. And in my opinion, it's just a lazy approach and a lazy take to talk about with Clemson football. Is there valid points when it comes to the portal and Clemson? 100%. I think we laid that out very clearly in last week's show, right? When we talked about Dabo's comments on the portal and some of the things that he should and should not say, right? But to kind of bring up a couple of my issues with this article that Connor wrote. And look, I don't know Connor. I'm not bashing him. He's a sports writer, and I'm sure he writes nationally, right? Like, he writes for every and any team out there. So he's probably not intimately aware of the ins and outs of Clemson's roster, right? But a couple of things that just really bothers me with his article, and I think it speaks to the larger thing that you were talking about, Jordan, with the lazy takes in the national media. He immediately he immediately points out Dabo's lack of use in the transfer portal. And then he points out a statement that we talked about in length last week when Dabo said majority of the players in the portal aren't good enough to play at Clemson. And according to Connor, that's a delusional statement. Contraire, okay? Yeah. With the type of football program that Clemson is, most of the players in the portal aren't good enough to play at Clemson. There's a good chunk of them that are, but most are not good enough to play at Clemson. And if most were good enough to play at Clemson, you wouldn't be talking about Clemson winning 9 or 10 games. I can tell you that, or even 8 games. So no. That was, kind of the first point that he made that I kind of took issue with. And then he and you kind of mentioned this, Jordan. I just want to read so that I'm not paraphrasing his stuff, right? I want to represent what he said properly. He said Clemson has the talent on the roster to contend for an ACC title, but it feels like the program is falling too far behind in the national race to even compete for a playoff spot. So, that's all one sentence. You contradicted yourself in the same sentence. If they're competing for an ACC title, they're also competing for a national or a playoff spot. It's a 12-team playoff, and if they win the ACC, they get an automatic bid to the playoff. So that was kind of one of the things that just kind of came out. And then he talks more about Sweeney doesn't use the portal, and then he says something interesting. He said if Sweeney utilized the portal, his team may have avoided this list, but they are looking at another 9 to 10 win season at best, in my opinion. And this is something else that I really want to talk about. He follows that up by, is that good enough for the 10 to 20 range? Of course it is. Are you telling me a team in a Power 4 conference, which is what we're operating in now, that wins 9 or 10 games, isn't going to be ranked in the top 10 to 20? And they play a schedule like Clemson does this upcoming season? You're crazy if you think that they wouldn't be ranked in the top 10 to 20. That's first and foremost. The other thing that I really want to talk about, and I've started to see this more and more as people in college football and around college football circles are discussing Clemson and the regression that our program has obviously gone through, right? I make no refutes that Clemson football as a program has regressed. That's very clear. No one can deny that. No one is trying to deny that in my mind, okay? So that's first and foremost. But to sit here and act like that it is that you're a bad football program from a Clemson standpoint because you're only winning 9 or maybe 10 games a year is crazy to me. Like, these people are throwing around 9 and 10 wins like they mean nothing in college football. This is major college football. And I get everybody out there is going to say, oh, well, Clemson plays in the ACC. They have an easy schedule and all of this stuff. Okay, fair enough. You don't respect the ACC. I don't care what conference you play in. If you win 9 or 10 games, you're a good football program. And the fact that
especially consistently
winning 9 or 10 games, not winning one, every now and then winning 9 or 10 games. Clemson has consistently done this for, the past decade plus, right? So it's crazy to me how when we're talking Clemson, how suddenly 9 and 10 wins mean nothing. And I get the regression. And I'm first and foremost, like, I want Clemson to get back to the point where they're competing for national championships year in and year out. We're clearly not there, but we're also not on the floor winning 3 games a year either. So, I feel like there's just this approach that is, I wouldn't say it's unfair. Like, the criticism is fair, but I feel like there's some excessive criticism because the bottom hasn't fallen out, right? Clemson is still competing for the ACC every single year. They're still winning, 9 and 10 games a year. They're still a very good football program. They're not elite anymore. They're not at the top of college football or near the top of college football anymore, right? But we're still right there, right? And the ship can still be righted. So what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, yeah, you hit it. And that's kind of the thing. I saw a post from Larry Williams over at Tiger Illustrated, who does good stuff. And he lined it out really well about just kind of what the narratives about the transfer portal have kind of done as far as the conversation and the attitude towards Clemson football. And he goes in depth about kind of how the transfer portal and NIL era also coincided with the drop off in play for Clemson at quarterback and wide receiver, and how and some of the staff some of the staff shakeup that wasn't properly addressed. And
Yeah.
so the transfer portal NIL era has been a convenient sort of scapegoat for what Clemson, why Clemson has seen the decline it has, when in reality, it's a lot deeper than that. And it's not because Clemson didn't lose 4 games because they didn't use the transfer portal, and they didn't, DJ Uiagalelei didn't succeed because they didn't use the transfer portal. And the wide receivers that didn't pan out weren't because they didn't use the transfer portal, or really NIL, but it's been a convenient coincidence. And so the national media and people who don't, like we said, the people that don't follow the program and know the ins and outs, they're going to it's a very convenient talking point. And so I think you kind of nailed it. And that's kind of one of the frustrating things, because it's like, well, at the end of the day, in order for Clemson to dispel that narrative, they're going to have to win games, because until they right the ship and look more like the Clemson that people had gotten used to seeing, that's going to be the talking point, whether it's true or not. And so you kind of we talked about how frustrating it is, and how dishonest all of it is, but that's kind of the reality of, and kind of the bed that we've made for ourselves. I just say we in a figurative sense.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just one of those things where you just kind of have to be like, well, there's going to be more Clemson overrated articles and more Dabo isn't using the transfer portal articles until you go out and win games. But I think this team is positioned to win games in a good amount. We talked about it. I really like what this team has this year. And so it's one of those it's one of those things where you just got to go win games. And what Clemson used to do, shut them up by winning games on the field. And that's how you go about doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, all you can do if you're Clemson at this point, and if you're Dabo Swinney at this point, is you can win games. That's really the only thing that is going to curb some of this criticism of the transfer portal and overall the football program in general. So, I don't believe Clemson is overrated. Let us know what you think about in the comment section. Do you believe Clemson is overrated? They were also accompanied on this list by Connor over at Saturday Blitz with Miami, Penn State, Texas A&M, and Oklahoma. Rounded out with Clemson, obviously. Those were the top 5 most overrated programs heading into 2024. I will, with Jordan, will agree to disagree with our buddy Connor. No hate to him. Just thought it was an interesting article. And it's not really just Connor. It's kind of the overarching media, which is kind of our point. So we got 29 people in the live chat right now. Make sure you guys are hitting that like button as you come in. Get your comments in the comment section. Me and Jordan, once we're done with the planned portion of our show, once we get through all of our topics, we will turn the show over to the comment section, and we will let you guys drive the show. You guys can ask us questions and all of that stuff. If you're watching this in the rewatch, we will put the timestamps in the description of this video. We appreciate you coming, even though you can't be here for the live show, and watching in the rewatch. All right, Jordan, with that said, let's go ahead and transition to our next topic of the night. And this is a familiar face, a familiar name that all Clemson fans, I'm sure, know and probably don't love so much because he's never really been a fan of Dabo Swinney or the Clemson football program, really. And that is none other than ESPN's own Paul Finebaum. Of the Paul Finebaum show. He also does stuff with other interviews and stuff like that. Does a lot for the SEC network when it comes to ESPN and all of that stuff. And he had some pretty interesting comments, I would say, on our head ball coach, Dabo Sweeney. And he there was an article that I ran across on 3, and it was written by Griffin McVeigh this week on 3. You guys can go check it out. It's titled Paul Finebaum on Dabo Sweeney's Future at Clemson. I think his time is nearly up. He goes on to say, he obviously went on a radio show, and he made comments and said that sources that he is close to, and his sources are apparently both Clemson fans and Clemson graduates, and he has polled them allegedly, and they feel that Dabo Sweeney's time is nearing the end at Clemson. And when he gives a time frame that he's talking about. He says when he says Dabo Sweeney's time is nearing the end, he means the next 3 to 5 years. So Paul Finebaum is saying that his time's nearly up. In the next 3 to 5 years, Dabo Sweeney will no longer be the head football coach at Clemson University. Jordan, your thoughts?
It's just one of those, another one of those Paul Finebaum, my show is kind of falling into irrelevance as far as the college football world is concerned. People are kind of fed up with me, so I got to go and get clicks. No, but in all seriousness, this is the least surprising thing ever. I mean, he's been espousing the doom of Clemson for 3+ years now.
Yeah.
And even when Clemson was at the top of college football, he was a critic. That's his brand. He's an SEC guy. He's gonna tout the interests of the SEC above all else, and Clemson, along with other non-SEC powers, are a threat to that, and that's just kind of how he goes about doing it. I did find it funny, he claimed, the claims he made about, I talked to Clemson. They're not just fans, but they're graduates.
Yeah.
But he didn't specify what roles that potentially they have, or what connections his sources may have. For all we know, they could just be random Clemson graduates that have called into his show or that have met him in real life, but don't actually have any interest or inside knowledge into the program. Because I think he specifically noted that they were Clemson graduates to sort of paint this idea that these are people that have some sort of insider knowledge. As a Clemson grad myself, most of them don't. It's not, being a Clemson grad doesn't mean all of a sudden you get all this insider access to the program. You have to know people, and he didn't specify on that. So for all we know, it could be some random Joe Schmo, but he painted it and he gave it like an air of, these people are these are Clemson people through and through, and they're board of trustee members or faculty that work with the program every day, or donors. It's like, please stop. And so I thought that was funny because, and just frankly, it doesn't, beyond the tired narrative about Dabo letting the game pass him by. Dabo has shown no indication that he's ready to hang it up, and his actions have not suggested that he's ready to hang it up with the changes he has made. People are, they talk about not using the transfer portal, but a couple of years ago they were railing on his internal promotions and all the staff hires that he made that weren't panning out.
Right.
He fixed those. A few years ago, it was, Clemson doesn't host official visits in summer, and that's going to really kill them. And he pivoted, and obviously we've seen the success that the June, the early June official visit weekend has had for Clemson recruiting. I can go on, but it just
Jordan. You mean Dabo has changed his mind on stuff that he's done in the program in the past, and he's adjusted?
Yeah, That's news
I
to
don't
me
believe that.
too, I guess.
Uh-uh. That's not what Twitter told me.
No,
That's not what Twitter told me.
it's not. It's not what college football media in general told me. So it's like we can criticize Dabo for the things that he hasn't done,
Yeah.
and a lot of it is fair, but
Yes.
you also have to acknowledge what he has done, and so it's just
Right.
the actions he's taken me over the past couple of off seasons suggest to me that he wants to win and get this program back to where it was as badly as anybody else, if
Mhm.
not more so. I mean, Dabo is a competitor.
Yes.
I think that's one thing that just doesn't get that people just kind of gloss over. Like, he's one of the most driven people. As far as college football is concerned, he's one of the most driven people I've ever seen. I mean, you go look at his background and what he did to become a head coach. He didn't
Mhm.
go the conventional route. He didn't get to be a coordinator at a major program. Um, he had to spend time out of football before he actually got his real shot. It's one of those things where people he's been around so long that people are just kind of numbed and kind of they kind of it's like just one of those things that's a given. His personality and how he actually goes about his business, it's just kind of people don't really think about it anymore. But he's one of the most fierce competitors in the sport, and he didn't get to where he was by not not being able to adapt and not being able to make changes, because Clemson was at the forefront of change in college football when they went on their run, and so it's one of those things where they've had to make adjustments, and they're still making adjustments, and I think Clemson will continue to make those adjustments. So yeah, I Finebaum, he's going to say what he has to get reactions, because
Yeah.
that's what he does. Thankfully, we're talking about him right now, but
Yeah.
we don't actually give him any. We're not actually giving him any money. We're just putting his name out there, because we're not playing his clips or watching his shows. So
Yeah.
or giving him further engagement. But yeah, it's just one of those things where it's low hanging fruit right now. It's really easy to rail on Dabo and Clemson as a program, and just say whatever gets the most reaction and the most clicks. So
Yeah.
that's what media is nowadays.
Absolutely. It's all about how many clicks you can get. It's all about the rise that you can get out of various fan bases, and he tends to do that with the Clemson fan base, and that's a valid technique that works a lot. Obviously, he's made a career out of making very bold statements about all kinds of coaches and universities and programs and all of that stuff. And he kind of pointed out the fact, obviously he started with talking about the six consecutive playoff appearances that Clemson went through, the national championship in 2016 and 2018, and how they lost 7 games throughout that 6-year span. And then the past 3 seasons, Clemson has lost 10 games in a 3-year span. Obviously, that's a steep increase. No one can refute that. That is a valid argument about what is going on in Clemson's program and the regression that has happened, at least on the field, when it comes to wins and losses, right? And you can attribute that to whatever you want. I think there's several things to attribute that to. I think there were some bad coaching hires made. I think some players didn't pan out like we thought they would. I think there were injuries. There was coaching turnover, obviously, within the ranks. There is a multitude of issues that you can point to explain Clemson's regression, right? But regardless, Clemson has regressed, right? But then again, he goes with these same, like, it's almost like these people are parroting verbatim the same talking points. And I'm going to prove it to you, because he said, and I quote, he's falling so far behind. Literally the same quote we just read from Connor over at Saturday Blitz. They say the exact same thing. So it starts with the national media and it just gets parroted around. And this is what I'm talking about when people are talking about Clemson football. And then he goes on to say that doesn't mean they can't have a good program. That's if you call a 9-3 or 8-4 or maybe the occasional 10-2 a good program. In what world in major college football is that not a good program? Let's take Clemson away from it. Take the Tiger Paw off. Take Clemson University away. Forget Dabo's the coach. Random college football program consistently going 9-3, 8-4 with the occasional 10-2 season. In what world is that not a good football program? Like this is what I'm talking about in the national media. They throw these quotes and these things that they say out there as it pertains to Clemson. But if it wasn't Clemson, if it was really most other schools, you'd be like, what are you talking about, dude? Like, of course that's a good football program. What do you mean? Like, in the Power Four that we're currently operating in, how is that not? You're gonna consistently be ranked. You're gonna go to good bowl games. You're gonna find yourself into the 12-team playoff. Like, in what world is that not a good football program?
I don't know, but it's not. Apparently, it's the world that Paul Finebaum is living in, but it's not mine. I don't know.
I mean, it's stuff like that. And again, I don't refute the fact that Clemson has taken some steps back. That's very clear. But when you're throwing comments out there like that, it's just like, what are you talking about, man? I don't understand it. But again, Paul Finebaum's one of those guys that kind of he says stuff to get a rise out of fan bases. He says stuff to get a rise out of coaches and to get clicks and all of that stuff and that it works. So that's why he does it. And you can't fault the man for that. He's trying to make a living, so good on him. But we're going to leave Paul Finebaum and some of his crazier comments there. Steel Gamble gets in with a $5 super chat. Thank you so much, Steel Gamble, for getting in and supporting the show. Really do appreciate you. He said, I agree we should use the portal more, but it baffles me how people assume that is our main problem. It's like 5% of the problem at best.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, it's one of those things where it's low hanging fruit. It's easy to talk about. Everybody talks about it, and so if Clemson doesn't succeed, it's the transfer portal. If something negative happens to Clemson, it's you didn't use the transfer portal, and so it's like, but half of the people that make these kind of that make these kind of statements and make these kind of articles couldn't tell you a thing about Clemson and what they brought in the high school ranks, what they have coming back, just what the coaching staff changes. It's been so lazy, and that's where we are. But you nailed it on the head, Steel Gamble. I mean, Clemson needs to be able to use the transfer portal when needed, and the fact that they went after guys and didn't get them is a problem. That's something that needs to be addressed. They need to be able to get guys when they feel like it's something that they need to do. They need to be able to do it and do it successfully, because that's how other the other top programs are able to operate. I mean, Georgia didn't, load up in the transfer portal by any means, but they got guys here or there that they felt like they wanted and needed. So Clemson has to be able to do that. But yeah, it's not the transfer portal hasn't been the biggest contributing factor to why Clemson hasn't seen the results that people had come to expect. It's a lot deeper than that. You're muted.
Sorry, it's 100% deeper than that, and you can look at Clemson's recruiting. It is exactly the same, about where it's always been through the entire Dabo Swinney era. So personnel is not necessarily the issue. Obviously, you miss on guys and things like that, but there's other things that have gone on in the program that have contributed far more than the transfer portal. I think it's one of those things that it's just easy to point through because the timeline does kind of line up, right? So it's just an easy thing to just be like, oh yeah, it's obviously the transfer portal, right? I don't think it is. I don't think it is, and I think as much as Dabo is never going to be a coach that relies heavily on the transfer portal. I don't think I can honestly say that if he thought that was going to fix Clemson, that he would just completely ignore it. I don't believe that. I could be wrong, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that completely disagree with that take, but I just don't believe if he thought that was going to fix all the issues that are going on with Clemson and that was just the easy button, that he would just continue to ignore it. But again, there's people that'll disagree with that, agree with that. It'll be all over the place on that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. But thank you for the $5, Steel Gamble. Appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate the support, Steel Gamble. We got 34 people, Jordan, in the live chat right now. Please go ahead and keep getting your comments in the comment section. We will get to all of your comments, or as many as we can, towards the end of the show when we are done with the plan portion. Please hit that like button while you're in here. If you're not subscribed to the channel, me and Jordan do the All-In Show right here every Thursday, 8 p.m., talking Clemson football, college football. At the end of the show, we let the fans drive the show. We answer your questions. We respond to your comments and all of that stuff. So if you like what we do here, stick around, consider subscribing and supporting what me and Jordan do here on Clemson football at the Voice of College Football. All right, Jordan, we got one more topic we are going to talk about tonight before we turn it over to the comment section. And let's go ahead and kick it off. I ran across another article this week, and I thought it was pretty interesting. And I think this kind of impacts college football and possibly a pretty big way. And you can kind of give me your thoughts on it, but I'm going to lay it out there for the fans that don't know about this. It was an article that I actually ran across on TigerNet, and it was talking about the possible cap being removed on how many staffers can be involved in on-field coaching, right? So right now, obviously, staffers cannot be involved in on-field coaching in any way. You have 10 assistants. A college football program has 10 assistants. Those are the guys that can be involved with on-the-field coaching, and that is all. 11 if you include the head coach. So those 10 assistants and the head coach can be involved in on-the-field coaching, and they can go and recruit, obviously, go to high schools, recruit players, off-campus type visits, right? That's what they can do. Staffers cannot be involved in that stuff whatsoever. Now they do all the ancillary stuff. They put together film packages. They do all this sort of stuff, right? But as of now, there's a cap on it, right? They cannot do any on-the-field stuff. Now, the Football Bowl Subdivision Oversight Committee is apparently proposing the removal of this cap on staffers and basically just allowing staffers to do on-the-field coaching as well. Now, that would still limit them from doing off-campus recruiting visits. They still would not be able to be involved in off-campus recruiting visits, but that would allow them to do some on-the-field coaching. And Dabo Swinney kind of came out and commented on this in support of it, obviously. He said he thought it would be great for the student athletes, and he thought it would – one of the big pieces that he thought it would help improve for the student athletes is when all the coaches are off during the heavy recruiting cycle and they're all off away from Clemson, the staffers could still do some stuff with the players and not feel like they're breaking any rules by answering questions or helping the players out with this, that, or the other. So, Jordan, what are your thoughts on the possible removal of this cap on staffers and them being allowed to participate in on-the-field coaching? And what impact do you think could that have for not only Clemson but college football as a whole?
I mean, it's big. It's one of those rules that has been kind of dubious in how it's been enforced, I guess is the right word to say. Um, it's just kind of hard to kind of police that, first of all.
Yeah.
Um, and like the second thing is like what advantage other than I mean it's good for the coaches to be able to hire guys and have more help on the field, if you can afford it.
Mhm.
Because at the end of the day, it's like I said, it's one of those things you can't really enforce. And there other programs that they've had analysts that they're not on the field coaches technically, but
Right.
they do this stuff here or there, and it's like there's not really a whole lot you can do about it. And so,
Yes.
there's been a lot done by programs to circumvent it. So it was kind of a pointless rule to begin with. Um, I do like that they're still limiting the amount of they're still keeping the cap on who can do recruiting, but I think it's big
Yeah.
for these programs to be able to hire and have more on the field coaches, because when you have a roster of 130 kids that when you include the 85 scholarships and then whatever walk-ons you may have, which every school has a lot, some have more than others, but either way the roster is gigantic. It's not like being in the NFL
Yeah.
where I mean it's only a 53-man roster, but you have to but you have a lot. It's kind of weird. Like it's a smaller roster, but the NFL teams have more staff and help than some of these college football programs at times. So I think it gives the programs the opportunity to, um, you know, just if they can afford it, to be able to manage their roster and coach up their roster a lot better. And I think that for a program like Clemson that obviously pays their staff as well as basically anybody in the country, I think it definitely helps. But when you're trying to win in major college football, you can never have too many guys helping you out. And so that's I think it, I, and I think kind of when you think about it, um, the hire of Lorenzo Ward the other week is kind of makes a little bit more sense if this rule does come into play, because and all the analyst hires that Clemson has made over the past couple of seasons, like those are things that could benefit you as well. So yeah, I think it's a rule that's kind of been overdue. Just because it's one you it's like, what are you going to do? It's kind of just been a pointless rule, and teams have had ways to work around it. So better just get rid of it and let the chips fall where they may there.
Yeah, and absolutely. Look, I mean, at the end of the day, you're right, Jordan. You can't police it. Like, you have all of these staffers. Are you telling me they're doing absolutely nothing on the football field throughout all of college football? I mean, and how do you even know what they're doing? Like, what do you got an NCAA rep at every single practice across the country every single day? Like, you don't know what these staffers are doing. So to that point, you might as well just let them do some on the field coaching, right? Dabo talked about, obviously it allows more coaches for each program out there, not just Clemson. And they're already on staff, right? You don't have to hire more coaches; they're already here. That you can just now expand their role and give them a little extra stuff that they will do on the field, right? They can mentor players in a bigger way. They can be more involved with the day-to-day operations at practice and helping that run more smoothly. um, and I do like what you said, obviously not expanding the amount of people that can go off campus and recruit high school players. I think that's important, right? Because that keeps it a little bit more fair for some of these smaller schools that obviously don't have as robust of a support staff like a Clemson or some of the other major big time college football programs. So that kind of keeps that a little bit more, I guess, regulated, if you will. So I think it's a good idea. I'd like to see it pass. I don't really see, you know, very many downsides to it. Like you said, a lot of this is probably already going on in college football every single day across practices all over the country. So I think it's a good idea. I think it would help, not just Clemson, but a lot of football programs around the country. So I hope it passes. Apparently, they're going to make a decision sometime in June. So it could even affect this upcoming season. If that does pass and get approved and become a new rule, that could affect this upcoming 2024 season. So that'll be interesting. We'll keep an eye on it throughout the month of June, see what kind of decision they stumble upon, and I'm sure we'll be talking about it again at a later date on this show. All right, everybody. That kind of does it for the planned portion of the show tonight. We just wanted to go through and talk a couple Clemson stories that we ran across that we thought were interesting. We still have 27 people in the live chat right now. Thank you guys so much for showing up. Really do appreciate you. If you're watching this in the rewatch, we are going to post timestamps for each individual topic that we just covered. And without further ado, Jordan, we're going to go ahead and kick it to the comment section. Let's see what they're talking about. This is your time to get your comments in, get your questions in. Me and Jordan will spend the next little bit conversing and going back and forth with you guys about what you want to talk about. Let's see what the people want to talk about, Jordan.
All right, let's do it. We've started starring comments and questions that you guys have made throughout the live chat because you guys ask some really good questions and then we lose them, and when we get to this portion of the show and we feel like we want to address it, and because we don't want to just people have to wait till the end of the show because some of you guys get your questions in early and during the show and sometimes before. So Dylan starts us off. He asked earlier in the show, how many games in until we have a receiver with 100 yards? Who will it be? I'm thinking Antonio Williams. I think that'd be a pretty good pick. I could totally see that. This is an interesting question because one of the things that I think a lot of people forget is that when Clemson opened with Georgia in 2021, they had a 100-yard receiver that very first game. I'm not going to tell anybody who it is. Who can, without looking it up, who can tell me what receiver that was? That, yes, Clemson did have a 100-yard receiver in that Clemson Georgia 10-3 opener. So I want to see if anybody can guess it. And it's one of the things that I have not thought about in a long time. And I remember looking at the box score a little while ago, and I was like, oh my God, he really did. So I want to see if anybody can get it right.
It's almost hard to believe with how that game went that there was a 100-yard receiver on Clemson's side of the ball.
Yeah.
Really, both teams. Both teams could not move the ball in that game.
Dylan guessed Justin Ross. No, it was not. Even it actually wasn't. And it was not Bo Collins, Jay.
Yeah, Jay guessed Bo Collins.
It was not Amari Rogers. He was gone by then.
He was gone, yeah.
I want to see if anybody will get it. It'll be one of those things like, what, really? It was him? But yeah. He played really well that game too. No, it is not a receiver. It's not a tight end, JR.
Dylan Spell says Cornell Powell.
Nope, Cornell Powell was gone by 2021. Think about that 2021 receiver room and how banged up it was. Think about the names. Think about who showed up, who didn't. Oh, we got a winner.
Ngata.
Our moderator, Joseph Ngata. Yes, he had, I believe his final numbers were 6 catches, 106 yards. And he was one of 2 players that entire season to have a 100-yard game. The second one was Bo Collins against Wake Forest. So fun little Clemson trivia. Yes, it was Joseph Ngata. He actually was the only 100-yard receiver between either Clemson and Georgia in that game.
Yeah, honestly, just thinking back, like obviously I haven't gone back and looked at the box score in quite some time, but just thinking back off of memory how that game went, it is hard to believe there was any 100-yard receiver
Yeah,
in that game on either side of the ball.
it was rough,
There
man.
was zero offense in that game.
Yeah, it's one of those things you have to look it up to believe me, because it's like if I hadn't already known it, I would have been like, if someone had told me that, I'm like, you're lying.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I haven't gone back and watched that game in a long time, but he did play well. He had some tough catches, some contested catches in that game.
Wow,
Um,
good for him.
But to go back, because I never actually answered Dylan's question, but I wanted to see if people would get that trivia. He said, "How many games in until we have a receiver with 100 yards?" I will not bet this go around, even though I feel like this is a better matchup. Clemson matches up more favorably offensively in this version of Georgia than 2021. I'm not going to bet that Clemson has a 100-yard receiver in that game. I'm going to say week 3 or the third game.
Yep.
Because I don't think App State will be a 100-yard receiver either. I'm gonna say 3, but I do think Clemson will have a 100-yard receiver.
Week 3 that'll be the NC State game.
Yeah, which is kind of a bold choice, but because NC State does have some talent in the secondary.
Yeah.
But I like Clemson at home, and I think that's going to be the first game where you're not going to be playing an overwhelming defense, and you're not going to be playing a team that you're not playing in no disrespect to App State, but you're not going to be playing a team where you're constantly rotating guys in and out. And if you get up early, you're putting the backups in. It's just harder in these group of 5, some of these group of 5 matchups and the FCS teams to really have one standout individual offensive performance. So I'm going to say,
yeah, I mean, you think obviously Georgia, that's tough. That's tough to predict a 100-yard wide receiver in week 1. I would not put any amount of money on Clemson have a 100-yard receiver against Georgia. You think App State, if all goes well for Clemson, they're probably going to rotate a lot of guys, right? A lot of guys are going to get touches. So in order for somebody to have kind of standout game, that would have to probably be a closer game, so that you're not rotating so many guys. Maybe NC State would obviously be the next, probably one that I would think would be most likely, at least in the first 3 games, but definitely the 4th week, I would hope. Yeah. Stanford comes to Clemson, so but let's hope we get it in week 1. But if not, it'll definitely happen by week 4, unless the wheels have just coming off for Clemson football.
Yeah.
By then.
Yeah. We'll see, but and like Jay points out, that we've talked about it. Like this wide receiver room, there's a lot of guys that are going to play and will be able to play. So it's going to be tough to have a ton of guys with 100-yard games, unless they're like really feeling it. But we'll see. Hey, it might be one of the freshmen, like we were talking about. Antonio Williams, Tyler Brown, Adam Randall. Like those are guys that absolutely are candidates, but wouldn't surprise me if the first 100-yard receiver comes from one of these freshmen.
Wesco, TJ Moore, they could absolutely do it.
But yeah, a lot of people surprised about that. And got a fun fact. That's one of the weirdest stats that I can like, because it just, how did anybody have in a 100-yard game? But Ngata was really good in that game. I have to go back and watch. I was like, did he have? And he got open and he made some tough contested catches. And he had me thinking. I was like, oh, that's the Ngata we thought we were going to get last year, but he was hurt. By last year, I meant 20. But at the time, I thought we were going to get him in that version of him in 2020, and obviously the injuries happened, and 2021 wasn't much better.
Not at all. It was not a good season for any receiver, really. You asked that question. I didn't know. I had no idea.
Yeah,
our 100-yard receiver was.
it's again, it's one of those weird stats. It's just like
I probably would have put a good amount of money on there was not a 100-yard wide receiver in that game for either team.
yeah,
More. Yeah.
you would think
You
so.
could have sold me on that a lot easier than you could have sold me that Clemson had a 100-yard receiver in that game.
Yeah. You know what's funny? You know, I think after the Bo Collins game against Wake Forest, I'm trying to think who else. Did anybody else have an 100-yard? Did anybody have an 100-yard game in 2022?
No, I
I
don't
know
think so.
nobody had one for the rest of the season. The
For
2021.
the rest of 2021, after Bo Collins, I don't think we had one. And then I think for the entire 2022 season,
Wait a minute. Did Cole Turner hit 100 in the ACC championship? I think he might have. Somebody fact check that. I don't remember. I think Cole Turner might have been our first. I feel like I remember some saying that was like Cole Turner was the first 100-yard receiver for Clemson in like a calendar year or something like that.
That could have been.
I think he might have hit 100. Big Mick says Turner. He says Turner. So I think I'm right. But he also asks, yes, earlier in the show, Clemson's roster for 2024 is rated 7th. So what player in the portal is going to improve that rating? You know, I'm still not sure exactly how transfers factor in when they do those. If you're referring to the 24/7 Sports Team Talent Composite, has that even come out yet? I know it comes out sometime before the season. But I don't remember how they factor in transfers. But you know, to say that there wasn't a player in the portal that wasn't going to improve like Clemson's roster quality, regardless of what the numbers say, yeah, that would be dishonest. So, but I agree with the sentiment. Like there wasn't like this massive like run of really, really talented players that Clemson was going to be able to land that would really be true difference makers. And, you know, first of all, I mean, they have to be difference makers and you have to be able to have the means to get them. And, you know, so like who was the biggest offensive line? I mean, Clemson went after a couple. I don't know who the Caden Proctor. I mean, he already knew where he was going.
Yeah.
Caden Proctor was probably the best offensive lineman in the entire transfer portal cycle. Clemson looked at him.
Yep.
He
knew where he was going before he entered the portal.
Right. He announced he had announced like it was leaked or announced that he was heading to Bama before he was officially in the portal. So it's like, but and then that kind of goes back to what Dabo was talking about last week. It's like most of the guys that are really, really good already know the deal and whatever he's already done. And you know, I heard Josh Pate talk about, well, then you better tamper. But he's like, that's not something Clemson is willing to do.
Yeah. We all know Dabo's not going to do that.
That's the reality of it. So you have to be able to find those guys that are in the portal for the right reasons and not just, you know, it's fine to be looking for a place where you'll be taken care of financially, but you know, if you're going to come for money, then you'll just as easily leave for money. And so that makes the pool of players that Clemson is actually it's feasible for them to get really small. And so that's where, you know, Clemson is going to have to be better, is that because of how you operate, you've knowingly and selectively narrowed your pool of players that you can go after, and you have to be able to go and get them. So, you know, going after those offensive linemen and not getting them is, you know, that's a problem. I don't think it's going to make or break Clemson's season, but they clearly felt like it would have helped. And so, you know, if you had landed the kid from Shorter or the Rutledge kid from Middle Tennessee or that center from Bama that they had talked to, there were 4 or 5 different names that Clemson was involved with at different points. Like if you can't get them, then you know that's a problem. You have to be able to land guys. But I agree with your overall sentiment, Big Nick, that there wasn't some big time transfer portal player that would have transformed Clemson's roster in 2024. But there were certainly guys that would have helped.
Yeah, certainly. There are guys that definitely would have helped, and I think Tig brings up a good point that kind of goes with what he was trying to say. As one thing, who are you going to kick off a scholarship for the transfer portal guy? That is a decision you got to make.
Yep. That's where, I mean, that's one of those things. Jay asked, well, he says, I haven't heard an analyst mention Peter Woods and TJ Parker also. Yeah. I mean, that's.
Again, anytime Clemson is mentioned, all it is Dabo doesn't like the transfer portal. He doesn't use the transfer portal. He doesn't like NIL. Clemson doesn't offer any NIL. They don't use NIL, which obviously we have gone in depth on, and we have refuted those statements.
Yeah.
But again, and Jay, like to your point, that's what's unfortunate to me is because Clemson's got some dudes on this roster, man. Like, why is no one talking about Barrett Carter in his final season at Clemson?
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the quietest, biggest, returning players in all of college football.
No one's talking about him.
Afterthought.
No one's talking about him. This dude could have an All-American season, and no one's talking about him. Nobody's talking about, Peter Woods. Clemson's moving him to defensive end. How do you think that's going to work out? Man, that's quite a duo that Clemson pulled out of nowhere. TJ Parker, Peter Woods opposite each other on defensive end, plus all the defensive talent. People aren't looking at Clemson's roster and breaking down the talent that's on there and giving real thoughts on, this is how good or not good we think they're going to be based off of the guys that are on the roster. Instead,
I could live with that, even if they're lower on a position group than I am.
Absolutely.
I could live with that. I was like, okay, well, at least you looked at the team and not just the fact that they didn't take transfers and dismiss and ignore what they already have.
Right. I would just like to hear some people talk about the players on Clemson's roster, right? I'm so sick of every time there's a video about Clemson or an article about Clemson, it's portal, NIL. Like, let's talk about the dudes that are on the roster, okay? Yeah, Clemson didn't bring in a transfer portal player. They're not going to. Leave it there. Let's talk about the season upcoming. Let's talk about their schedule. Let's talk about the guys that came back. Let's talk about, the outlook that you have based off of their roster, So that's what I want to hear more of, and it's just unfortunate that we don't hear it.
Yeah, unfortunate. John, he's probably already started his show, but he did ask a question, a good question. He said, how did Dabo recruit Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence, and how can he replicate that? He expounded upon that, and he meant in the transfer portal NIL era, recruiting quarterbacks it's a different game than it was.
Yes.
And this is just for the general audience. It starts with relationships. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what those recruitments were. Clemson. It's one of the, people talk about it. It's, oh man, the Clemson recruiting. It's like, it's like pulling teeth. Like they don't offer juniors, or they don't offer sophomores. They don't offer freshmen. They don't just send out offers. They court the player and they get them on campus, and some of the they start these relationships when they're younger, but they don't just say we want you. It's like Dabo basically says, I don't even know you yet. Why? And you got some of these programs that offer these sometimes 8th, 9th, 10th graders without ever actually even speaking to them or meeting their families or anything like that. So that approach in how Clemson went about recruiting was different at that time.
Absolutely.
It just, there weren't programs that were doing it like that. He didn't pull the trigger and offer Trevor as a 8th grader like so many other programs did.
No.
he loved Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson had, he knew Deshaun Watson a really long time and was introduced to him like several, 3-4 years before he was even eligible to graduate. But he still waited. He got to know Deshaun. He got to know Trevor and their families, and that's was what drove those recruitments, and that's what ultimately won Clemson those recruitments was the relationships, because Clemson had been on them the longest, but they also made it very apparent and clear about what their intentions and what it's like we want to recruit the person and not the player. And I know I'm starting to sound like Dabo. Good Lord, but that ultimately was what it was, and I think the notion that approach can't work now is misguided, and that the delineation between the time before and the portal era, you're going to lose out on some recruiting that way, but there are still plenty of players, not just quarterback, that are drawn by how Clemson does things. I mean,
yes,
look at the players that they've gotten these last couple of cycles. Like, you don't think Bryant Wesco and TJ Moore weren't offered significantly more enticing financial backing and offers? Yeah, I mean,
guarantee you they were.
If you think they weren't, then I mean, I don't know what to tell you, but Clemson didn't outbid for these guys.
Right. They were both at one point 5 stars, right? Obviously, Brian Wesco at the end kind of lost his.
He's about to make that look stupid this year.
Yeah, TJ Moore gained his, but whatever you want to think, they were both obviously elite recruits at the wide receiver position. So they were clearly offered NIL deals well in excess of what Clemson offered, and they landed them. And I do get the question. In today's college football, how do you land a big time? How do you land a Deshaun Watson or a Trevor Lawrence today without bidding for them? Again, to your point, Jordan, how did we recruit Watson and Trevor Lawrence? He identified them early and he built a relationship with them. And then he sold it to their families. He sold it to them. And he identified that they were guys that would mesh with the culture that he has here at Clemson. And you can agree with it, you can disagree with it. He's not going to go buy a quarterback. No. He's not going to do it. Clemson is not going to do it. They're not going to go buy a quarterback. And I know there's a lot of Clemson fans out there that 100% disagree with that, and they think there's no way that you can be successful in current college football in this landscape without buying players through recruiting. But Clemson's not going to do it. We've said on this channel time and time again, agree with it or disagree with it, the way that Clemson divvies up their NIL is for roster retention, first and foremost. I'm not saying they don't give anybody NIL deals, right? But they reserve majority of their NIL funds for roster retention, for guys that are committed to Clemson, for guys that are loyal to Clemson, for guys that are, bringing something to the table. Not a guy straight out of high school. Not that they don't give those guys anything. I don't know what they gave them. I'm sure they gave Brian Wesco and TJ Moore something. I don't know what it is, right?
Yeah. Wasn't more than what they could have gotten. Like, I mean, the TJ Moore couldn't have gotten more from Florida, although which is, given the news as of late.
I don't know. The check might have bounced.
Yeah, he might have. I think TJ was. I think he has some foresight there.
You better be careful with that
family. So
that Florida NIL, those checks don't go through all the time.
Yeah,
but I think it is a fair question, and I understand people's doubts in the current landscape of college football with the way that Clemson is still going about things. And guess what? We're going to find out. We're going to find out if it's still a viable way to build a roster. We're going to find out if you can truly build a national championship contending team through high school recruiting and high school recruiting alone. We're going to find out because Dabo's certainly going to try to do it. And he's certainly going to try to do it without buying high school players as well. So I know there's a lot of people out there that think it's absolutely impossible. There's probably some people out there that think it's possible. And there's probably a lot of people, Clemson fans in the middle, that are like, I don't know,
Yeah.
that are kind of on the fence with it. So, but, we will find out.
Yeah.
And you have to build relationships, and you have to get on these guys early, and you have to cultivate those relationships, and, hope that you have enough guys that are going to choose what you're selling versus a paycheck, basically.
Yeah.
And
That's the reality.
that's kind
And
of the long and short of it.
yeah, I mean, I think Clemson needs to do more as far as NIL is concerned.
Absolutely.
I do want to make that clear. Um, but at the end of the day, they're not going to. You're never going to see Clemson have the type of pull from an NIL perspective that a Miami or an Ohio State, man. Ohio State is throwing them out right now.
Yeah. Ole Miss too.
Yeah, Ole
Dang,
Miss.
how much money they got over there?
Yeah, it's crazy, man. The Florida schools, like you're not gonna you're not
Miami.
gonna have as deep of a bag as them. Texas, like it's not going to get to the ever going to get to the point to that. So you have to do things a little bit differently.
Right.
But yeah, I think Clemson absolutely could do more as far as NIL is concerned. But they, you're never going to get to the point where you're flat out outbidding teams. You have to be able to sell a different thing, and that's what Clemson has done really well over the years. Is be different and attract the right kind of players that fit your culture. So,
and that's what
how it works
you're
out moving forward.
And I think you make a good point, Jordan. I think not only Clemson, but Dabo could do a better job of leaning into generating NIL funds for Clemson. And I say that as a complete outsider, as a fan, just like the rest of you. I don't know what he does behind the scenes, but I think that he could do a little bit more to help Clemson generate more NIL revenue from its fan base, from its alumni base, right? I think
that doesn't mean come out and beg for money. Yeah,
no. I'm not saying get on your hands and knees and please, we need $13 million by the 30th, or we're going to lose all of our team. I don't ever want to see our coach do it. I think I made that very clear in last week's episode, right? That I don't ever want to see Dabo come out begging for money. But I'm talking about with the fundraisers and the stuff, the prowl and growl that they go around and do that raises money for certain projects and things, and the athletic department. I think he could do more on that side of things to generate more NIL revenue that the football team could then turn into roster retention and maybe plugging a piece here and there with the portal or getting a high school recruit here and there, right? You know what I'm saying? And I'm not saying getting into bidding wars, but just creating more opportunities for the football program and the university. That's kind of what I'm saying.
100% agree. And that's what we'll see, and we'll have to see how all of that develops, in the coming years. Jay hits us with another question. He says, has Blake Hebert fallen from a rankings perspective? Haven't heard much of any about him recently. Yeah, well, he was invited to the Elite 11, so we'll kind of see. He was rehabbing that torn ACL he suffered first game of his junior year. So, he's kind of been an afterthought, as of late, just because they haven't been able to get eyes on him. That's just kind of the reality of how these recruiting rankings and sites work. It's like if they don't get eyes on you, you're not gonna, even if nothing happens, they're not going to you're not going to stay up, because it's not so much of you moving up or down, it's the players around you getting getting boosts, and by consequence you fall. So I don't really keep track of the week to week, month to month movements of a lot of Clemson recruits. I think 24/7 Sports had a recent update which affected some players. Some players went up, some that went down. I saw somebody upset about Gideon Davidson. I guess they dropped him, which, whatever. I know how good you and I know how talented that kid is. He's
guess what? He's the same recruit regardless of where they got him ranked.
Yeah.
So, I know, and look, I understand. I know people get wrapped around that, and they're like, "Man, this dude dropped 15 spots. What are we gonna do?" Like, it's the same recruit. At the end of the day, we recruited Blake Hebert, right? We didn't recruit him because he was ranked whatever in the 247. No disrespect to the 247 recruiting rankings, but that's not why Clemson recruited him. They recruited him because they have a relationship with him, and they scouted him, and they feel like that he's a good fit for Clemson, and they feel like that he could help them win, right? That's why you recruit the guy. So, and being injured and, it's kind of one of those things, out of sight, out of mind, right? So clearly you're going to drop. You're not going to get invited to things. You're hurt. You're rehabbing. Nobody's seen you play in a long time. So it's just one of those things. But he's the same quarterback that he was before,
It's a big year for him, senior year, and he'll have an opportunity, at his new school. We'll kind of see how that goes. John says, to be fair, there is heavy emphasis on the camps and events versus getting eyes on, and that's kind of what I mean. With Blake rehabbing that injury, is like he's not going to camps. And obviously he didn't have any his junior film really,
right.
And so that's just one of he's like they don't know what to do with him.
Yep.
But you're right, a heavy emphasis on camps. I mean, you saw how low TJ Moore was on a lot of sites until he showed up at Under Armour All-American game and killed everybody and was a monster in drills. And then they're like, and they got verified measurements of his speed and height and size, and they were like, this kid's a 5-star.
Who's this guy?
Yeah.
Where'd he come from?
Even though he was tearing it up at Tampa Catholic, and you could see you looked at him and it's like, he's a different type of cat. Like, he moves differently. But that's just kind of how they operate. If they can't get eyes on you at their events and camps, they're not going to put as much emphasis in. I mean, they look at your high school tape, but you're going to be at a disadvantage when in comparison to when in comparison to players that do show up to these 7-on-7 events and these elite camps and recruit camps, all that especially when you're in the state of Florida. And Blake being a New England kid it's going to be even more difficult.
Yeah,
he needs to go to camps and get eyes on him because they're not going to go up there.
You're going to have to travel for camps. They ain't holding no camps up where Blake Hebert's from. They're
not many.
If you live in Florida, you're obviously at an advantage. All the camps are there.
Yeah,
you just got to go 2 minutes down the road, and there's probably some.
You could throw a stone and hit a 5-star receiver or defensive lineman, and that just that's kind of the reality. Tiger Tom says another issue with Clemson football is, as you said, coaching, player development, especially at quarterback, hiring Riley Luke. This is solid remediation. Yeah, absolutely. It's been one of the least talked about things in the offseason was the hire of Matt Luke, the hire of Chris Rumpf. And obviously, I mean, it was a big hire. The hiring of Garrett Riley, obviously, was a big hire last offseason, but some of the shine was took off because of the struggles that Clemson had this year, even though I think Garrett Riley is the exact same coordinator he was at TCU. But I think when you go back and watch how Clemson's season played out and what they had to do to win games, you were like, well, they can't do everything that Riley wants to do right now. But I think this team this year is definitely in a better spot, but it's going to fall down to quarterback play, which is also Garrett Riley's responsibility. So it's a big year for him too. But I totally agree, Tom. Coaching, player development. I think Clemson is still feeling the ramifications of missing at quarterback, missing so much at wide receiver, and not really having guys with experience to address those needs and develop them properly. So it was a compounding thing.
Yeah.
Michael says, I hear it every day. Dabo doesn't do NIL. You correct these know-it-alls and explain they use it for retention and they go to portal next. And the truth is, it was Dabo's poor hires on offense. Yep. So, yeah, basically echoing what Tom just said. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, and it's not that Dabo hired poor coaches that won't, didn't have potential or to be successful. Is they just got the job and got the position when they weren't ready for it. And when you're a program like Clemson, and where you're recruiting these 4 or 5 star kids that are trusting you with their development, you have to have guys that have done it at a high level before. And I'm not saying you can't have guys here or there without experience, because that's Dabo's judgment in the past has certainly helped Clemson. Nobody knew who Tony Elliott and Jeff Scott were outside of Clemson. Clemson fans, because they were players. Nobody knew who those guys were. Right. So, and obviously they co-coordinated the 2 national championships. But you also had a good mix of experience. That experienced coaches that had done it at a high level. You had Brent Venables, you had Marion Hobby, you had Tennessee, both Marion Hobby and Brooks. I always forget his first name.
Dan Brooks.
Yeah, Dan Brooks. Longtime defensive line coaches that helped propel you to those national championships. I don't know why Dan just never hits my head. You had Robbie Caldwell. We complain about Clemson's offensive line development and just kind of the lack of NFL guys, but Robbie Caldwell put together really good offensive lines that were with very limited talent, and allowed you to win 2 national. I mean, that 2018 offensive line is one of the best, arguably the best in school history.
And there was a lot of Clemson fans out there that were ready for him to go. Yeah. So
I think it was time for him to go, because he was just getting up there. I think he agreed it was time. It was kind of time.
The hire that happened just didn't work out, and Clemson had quite a few specifically along the offensive side that just didn't work out. But again, Dabo didn't bury his head in the sand and say, I'm right and everybody else is wrong. No, he made the correction. He admitted the mistake by making a change, right? So, and that goes into this is why I wish there were, we were actually hearing stories written about Clemson, right? There's a lot of interesting things to dive deep into Clemson, right? The addition of a Matt Luke, the addition of a Chris Rump, some of the players coming back. This is the kind of stuff that you want to hear preseason. You want to hear this stuff being talked about, and roster breakdown and all of this stuff, and new coaches and how they're going to mesh together. And, how's Matt Luke going to mesh with, Garrett Riley? You want to hear stories about stuff like that, not the same recycled national stories. So, it kind of all goes hand in hand and goes together. And I'm just tired of hearing all the noise about the same thing over and over again.
I feel you 100%. And I think a lot of fans are tired at this point. I'm ready for games to be played, because it's like, man, whatever.
So can we just start games so we can stop hearing about the portal?
Yeah. John asked, do you expect, if all other things are equal and guys are healthy, that Dabo will continue to favor seniority, maybe putting Stellato as starter over Brown or others? I've always been of the mindset that if you have if you have 2 players, one an older player and one a younger, and they are more or less the same as far as performance is concerned, I've always defaulted to I think you should play the younger player. But it's not a steadfast rule, but I do, as a personal philosophy, I'm like, well, if there's not much difference between the veteran and the young guy, you might as well just play the young guy. Because obviously you're going to have more years out of him, and it's good. But I think the good thing this year is I don't think you're going to have to play one at the expense of the other. there is a lot of different, and that's what I love about this wide receiver room is the diversity of bodies and the versatility of the room. I mean, you can play Troy Stellato on the outside. You can play him in the slot. You can play Tyler Brown on the outside and in the slot. Antonio Williams can line up anywhere. I mean, Adam Randall is definitely like a true boundary receiver,
Right.
which is good to have. Bryant Wesco and TJ Moore absolutely can play anywhere on the field. They can be boundary guys that go up and get it. They can play in the slot. Like Cole Turner, obviously, is a guy you can do a lot of things with because of his speed down the field. Like this is a really good group. So I don't think it's one of those things where Dabo and the staff really have to make choices and kind of some hard decisions. And I think the fact that basically nobody left and nobody left from that group I mentioned is big. And obviously Bo Collins, heading to Notre Dame means there's a hole there to begin with.
Right.
So I don't think there's going to be snaps are going to have to be divvied up, but I don't think there's going to be one of those things where one guy's kind of frozen out, in favor of another. So you're going to see a lot of different personnel groupings, especially because you have a really good tight end room as well. So we'll see how it kind of shakes out, but I don't think that's going to be a huge. It's going to be a huge issue, but Troy Stellato is going to play, and I think he's going to play a good bit because he does. Yeah. He has good rapport with Cade. He showed that last year. Yes. It was a really good safety blanket. Yeah, he gets open and he made some really he makes some really like hands catches. Like yeah. I went back and watched some of the Gator Bowl and the catches that Stellato made. Like he had one where the defender literally had his hand on the ball, like just like gripping the ball, and Stellato just trying to muscle the ball out of Stellato's hands, and he brought it all the way to the ground with his hands. Like, yeah, like he's a really good receiver, and it took us a long time to be able to see that for reasons beyond Troy's control, but he's going to be a player that's going to help them out. So, I mean, he's absolutely going to play. And he has, like I said, he has a good rapport with Cade, and that's going to it's definitely going to give him a leg up. But, I don't, especially, you mentioned Tyler Brown and others, but like all of these guys are going to be able to play a good bit because of how Garrett Riley likes to use his personnel and the different personnel looks he likes to use. So I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think honestly, it's going to be receiver by committee this year. Everybody's like, "Oh, who's going to run? Who's going to start? Who's going to set the bench?" Like, look, I think there's just going to be a lot of different personnel packages to keep defenses off of balance, and I think it's a good problem to have. And yeah. Obviously, all of these dudes felt comfortable with where they stand within this offense and the touches to go around because none of them jumped in the transfer portal, which was, slightly surprising. I think because I was, more leaning to the fact that we would probably lose a wide receiver or two. But we didn't. We didn't lose any. And, we got a ton of guys and, you can list them off. Troy Stellato, Brown, Antonio Williams, Adam Randall, Cole Turner, TJ Moore, Brian Wesco. I mean,
we'll see how Ronan Hannafin and Tink Kelly, Noble Johnson, if he can get right.
Yeah, we'll see when he gets back healthy and everything. And gets through all his, off the field stuff. But, there's a deep wide receiver room there. And I truly think this year will be wide receiver by committee and just, hey, whoever's getting off that game, ride that hot hand, allow that person that is, obviously having their day to have their day, right? Without worrying about, who's starting versus not starting. And I think it bodes well because of the injury issues that we've had in that room in the past few seasons, right? In the most recent history of Clemson football. It's good that we got so many wide receivers that we believe that can go out there and really contribute in a big way to this offense because
And we've
obviously
seen all these guys at different points.
injuries are inevitable.
Yeah.
And most of these guys have been injured at different points in time in their career. So to think that they're all going to stay healthy the entire season is probably fool's gold. So it's good that we have a deep group that has a lot of experience, along with the addition of a Brian Wesco and a TJ Moore to complement that room. I think the Clemson wide receiver room is in the best shape it has been probably since that 2019 group.
Listen, I think especially when you couple it with the tight end room, I think it's better. Yeah, I think it's better than even Trevor's last year. From a overall makeup, obviously, you had Travis Etienne at running back, and that helped a ton. But outside of Amari Rogers and Cornell Powell, you didn't really have a threat at tight end. You didn't have much behind those guys. EJ Williams, he flashed as a freshman, but after that, couldn't rely on anybody. So from a depth perspective, this is the best group that this program has seen in about 5 years.
Right.
So I think, especially when you consider, I feel like a lot of teams would be really envious to have what Clemson has at wide receiver right now. And I think, you put Trevor in this offense, you put Deshaun in this offense, even hell, you put Kelly Bryant in this offense. I think this offense would be really good.
Yeah.
And so, that's why it comes down to Cade's development as a quarterback, because so much, as much as the offense struggled at times last year, and the offensive line wasn't always wasn't always great, and the fumbling and the turnovers weren't great. Cade created a lot of his own issues.
Yes, trying to do too much, trying to play hero ball.
Yep.
We saw Cade time and time again last year trying to play hero ball and do too much and forcing the issue, and sometimes holding on to the ball too long, which resulted in sacks, which resulted in strip fumbles, return for touchdowns, catastrophic plays. He's got to mature. He's got to learn to play within the system. And, sometimes throwing the ball into the stands or off on the sideline is the best option that you have with a given play. Like, live to fight another down, right? You don't have to score a touchdown every time you throw the ball, right? You don't have to make ESPN's top or Sports Center top 10 every time, every single play. And just understanding that and playing within the system and kind of allowing Garrett Riley to scheme things and get receivers open. But we'll see.
Yep.
That's a lot easier said than done. So still a lot of questions for Clemson heading into fall camp and the season.
Yep. Michael Forster said, I said Hebert did not make the elite. Did he? Oh, you know what? He was at the regional camp at the Elite 11. I said he made the Elite 11, but but he says, I see Hebert did not make the Elite 11. Is the staff still sold on him? Yeah. I mean, they like what they have. And again, I'm not a savant of quarterback evaluation, but Blake Hebert checks a lot of the boxes, especially when you consider who his quarterback coach and offensive coordinator is going to be. He checks a lot of the boxes of what Garrett Riley likes in his quarterback. Quick release, can make all the throws. He scrambles to throw, but he does have running capability. He's well built. He looks the part, and so it's kind of like what Max Duggan was at TCU. Like it's not an otherworldly arm talent, but he can make all the throws. He's well built. He has a running threat. He creates plays. That's what he showed, at least in his sophomore tape, and we'll see kind of what holds for a senior year and how he looks. But the staff really likes what they have. Now, that doesn't mean anything, as we know. Well, it doesn't always mean anything, as we know, because staff really love DJ Uyunglele. Everybody loved DJ Uyunglele, and it didn't work out. Cade Klubnik, the story is still being written on him, but he certainly hasn't lived up to the 5-star billing yet. But they loved Cade Klubnik, and everybody loved.
What wasn't to love about Cade Klubnik coming out of high school? Look what he did in Westlake, one of the biggest divisions in Texas football, one of the best divisions in the country. I mean, the dude was an absolute baller. I mean, you just turn on his film, But the transition to becoming, a college quarterback has been a bumpy road for Cade, and he hasn't taken as quickly as, probably the coaching staff and then the fans as well has thought he would. And that's just kind of that's the name of the game, man. That's why recruiting is so important and the evaluation process is so important. And there's no foolproof way to know how a dude's going to translate to college football. Just like, you see it in the NFL draft every year, right? Dudes are constantly overdrafted, right? They're draft bust, if you will, because for whatever reason, their game doesn't translate as well as everybody thought it would to the NFL. It just happens.
That's the reality. Quarterback evaluation is the hardest position to evaluate in all the sports, I would say. It's just the hit rate. It's kind of a crapshoot, even with these. That's kind of the reality.
Yeah.
And especially when you look at Cade's class, he's not the only one that hasn't looked that great. That hasn't played well at times. It hasn't just come out of the gates, firing like that. That is what it is. Gutter Rich 10 says they should have gotten Malik Murphy. Putting this pivotal season all on Cade is irresponsible. I think your second question, I've talked about it a ton. Like I do wish Clemson had brought in somebody from the transfer portal, just simply from a quarterback perspective, simply because it's like you only have 2 scholarship quarterbacks on the roster, and creating any type of competition is good for Cade. Whether Malik Murphy was the right guy, I don't know. He's just as much of an unknown as Cade, and he looked just as shaky when he played as Cade has. And he had better offensive talent around him when he played last year than Cade has had. And Malik Murphy has all world potential. Like I loved him coming out of high school. I think he's going to eventually become a good quarterback. But at the end of the day, you're adding another unknown. I would have preferred Clemson went and got somebody like a Grayson McCall from Coastal Carolina. Like we talked about that last week.
Yeah.
When someone asked who of all the ACC quarterbacks who to put on the team, who would you if you could put one of them on this current team, who would you get? If you could have gotten a Grayson McCall out of the portal, he went to NC State. So I don't think you necessarily had to win a huge bidding war to land Grayson McCall. Right. But I think he would have. He's a guy that could have fit this system and maybe given some competition. But obviously, sometimes you have to make promises, and a quarterback like that, you probably would have had to promise to start. But ideally, in an ideal world, if you could have landed a Grayson McCall, would have gotten.
And that's the other thing about specifically. It's not unique to the quarterback position, but specifically with the quarterback position. the bigger name guys that enter the portal, you have to pretty much guarantee them a starting job for them to come. Like, you really think Grayson McCall is interested in coming to Clemson as a backup to Cade? Why would he do that? Why in the world would he do that? Right? And just by being a Clemson fan, Dabo Swinney is not going to be like, yeah, Grayson, yeah, don't worry about it. You're going to come in here and start. He's not. He's going to be like, hey, we're recruiting you. You can come in here and compete with Cade. Whoever wins, wins, right? But that other guy, a Malik Murphy, say Clemson went after him, he would have had to been okay with that, because that would have been the situation that he was walking into.
Right.
Unless Cade, obviously decided to up and leave because you brought in a Malik Murphy or a Grayson McCall or something like that. Which
is a possibility.
And that could have happened as well. You never know. You can play the what if game, all day long. But sometimes I think us as fans make it a little like we're, we mentioned this last week, Jordan, like you're playing Madden, right? You could just plug and play. Yeah, you could just move players around. Nothing happens. Or the old school NCAA 14, right? You can recruit as many dudes as you want.
Five stars, load up on 5 stars.
You can load up with 5 stars. They're all on roster. Nobody gets mad about playing time. Nobody transfers. Everybody's still on the roster, right? That's just not the reality of college football. Roster management and keeping, a roster together through each and every offseason, I wouldn't want to deal with it. Man, it's got to be a nightmare to balance, what is it, 130 dudes on a roster, 85 of them, which are scholarship players. It can't be an easy feat to do that.
No, it's a very tough balancing game. And so I don't like that. So when I say it's like, man, I wish Clemson had gotten somebody, it's like, at the end of the day, it's like that's there were reasons why that might not be a good idea. So, and I fully acknowledge that. Like, there's potential drawbacks. It's like it's a no-brainer solution, because and it kind of ties back into NIL and all of that stuff. It's like, well, you have to be able to, like, not every program can do what Ohio State just did and brought in Will Howard and got Julian Sane from Alabama in the transfer portal and signed Aaron Noland in their high school recruiting class. And
I don't know how they did that, man. That's crazy.
Money.
Hey, must be nice.
Yeah. I don't know, especially at a position as premium as quarterback. I don't know if we have the facilities for that. So, like, I just, you have to be able to be smart and understand in the feel of your roster, and that's a tough thing. So it's like, while I wish Clemson had gotten a quarterback, I can't say for certain that this was the wrong decision. This could pay off. Cade, because you invested in Cade, he blossoms in year 2 under Garrett Riley. The offense is in the best shape it's been in 4 years, and you have a successful season. And then we're talking about, man, glad we stuck it out. Because again, progression is not always linear. As much, and not every quarterback figures, not every 5-star quarterback figures it out within their first season being a starter. That just doesn't happen. Doesn't happen that way. Dylan said, yeah, Turner had 100 yards versus North Carolina in that conference. I had a feeling, I was like, I think he did hit 100, because I feel like I remember there was a stat about that. It's crazy how little 100-yard receivers we've had. Because after that, we had Tyler Brown hit 100 against Syracuse, didn't he?
Yes.
I think that was the only 100-yard game anybody had all year.
Yeah. It used to be
Jake Brenningstool against Miami. Did he have 100? I think he did. He might have.
I believe so.
I have to look.
He had a big game.
Yeah,
he had a big time game. I'd have to look it up, but my first thought would be
one of our 100-yard games. One of our only 100-yard games in the last couple of seasons from a tight end.
I mean, it used to be no big deal when wide receivers went over 100 yards, but
Yeah.
we once upon a time we used to have multiple of that
Yes.
happen in the same
Yeah.
game.
In the same game.
Now we're lucky to get multiple in a season.
Yeah.
Oh,
Man.
man.
That's sad state of affairs sometimes. Just to think about. Jay says, I'm not a fan of getting a new quarterback to start of K this year. Malik Murphy would have had to be assured to start. And that kind of hits on what we were talking about. Like it's a lot of the quarterbacks in the portal are looking to be assured a starting spot, and that's the difficult thing. And so, but I don't know. And I don't want to. And again, I don't think Malik Murphy would have been the right. I wouldn't have been upset about it because I do like the potential he has, but you would just be adding another unknown into the room versus a proven commodity, but that's the hard part. But maybe that's the route you would have had to go because a proven guy is even more likely to be asked to be assured a starting spot. Last one before we kind of wrap things up. New King God, kind of our resident Miami fan. He shows up, showing up pretty consistently lately. He says y'all should do a ranking show where you rank your position up against the rest of the ACC. I like that. I think that would be a good idea for a segment at some point. I think now I think about it, I think you were the one that asked about the ACC quarterbacks last week. So yeah, I think that's something that we could definitely do. And it's something I would have to plan for, make sure because I don't. That's not one of those things where I'm just off the cuff. I know what like Stanford's wide receiver or Cal's wide receiver room is looking like this year, and so like I want to give a fair shake and ranking.
Absolutely.
For every team. So that might be something we do next week. So, but I like that idea. That'd be fun.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We'll definitely do that at some point in time on the show. Get a little bit of research in, and it's always fun to look into other teams and explore their roster as well, and kind of see what they got coming back versus their fresh blood they got coming in, and all that kind of stuff as well. So, and it always makes it's always some pre-work to all of our preview shows that we'll end up doing throughout the year as well. So get a little head start on that. It'd be good.
Absolutely. Dylan. Tyler Brown had 153 yards against Syracuse. Yeah, I thought I was like, I know he had like a big game, so I was like, he had to have 100. But I want to. Did Jake Brenning still have 100 against Miami? I want to say he did. This is going to bother me because I just want to. That'd be so on brand, especially since we lost that game. Like that would be.
Gotta know.
Let's see, game log. Of course he did. Yep, five catches, 126 yards, 2 touchdowns.
Yep,
25 yards a catch.
Look at you. All day.
I mean, yeah, he had a hell of a game. Kid, that was probably one of the most not inexplicable, but just I don't even want to talk about it. That was a game you had won. That was horrendous management at the end of that game. Mario Cristobal was the guy that was known for bad late game management, and Clemson's found a way to outdo him.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, I think we can wrap it up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that does it for the show tonight, guys. Thank you all for showing up and showing out, getting into the comment section, conversing with us about Clemson football, college football. Really do appreciate every single one of you. We got 31 people in the live chat right now. If you have not done so already, do us a favor. Hit that like button on your way out. If you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button on the way out. Me and Jordan do this show, the All In Show, right here on Clemson Football at the Voice of College Football every Thursday at 8 p.m. We'll be here talking all sorts of stuff. So stick around with us. Obviously, you don't have to be a Clemson fan. You saw Miami fans in here, Notre Dame fans in here, USC fans here. We got all sorts of fans. I think we had a West Virginia fan in here. We got all sorts of fans from different fan bases that come in here and hang out with us for our show as well. Put our show out there with all individual groups. Don't forget to support the rest of the Voice of College Football. Head over to the Michigan show if they still got it going on, and show them some support. Tell them that the Clemson channel sent you. And with all of that said, guys, until next time, I'm Tiger Paul Craven. He's Jordan Bowman. Go Tigers.
Later, y'all.